Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode, which is the first in the Media Power series, or it's the first after the introduction, I'm calling this Media Power number 1, 20th and 21st Century Fascism Mobilizes Media Power to Seize and Monopolize Political Power. So this episode has been kind of hard for me to put together because I've had to do some thinking or rethinking about the nature of fascism and also the role of media in that. Um, and I'm picking this as the first in this series about media power because it's pretty clear now in the current U.S. Environment that Fox News and the GOP, or Fox News and other and imitators, and the GOP, the Republican Party, a neo-fascist party now, pretty much almost completely, um, are in close coordination with each other. And the recent news about the from the Dominion lawsuit uh, shows this without a beyond a shadow of a doubt to anyone who would want to deny it. I mean, it was clear to people, to observers, for many years, but now we see from internal communication that basically the Fox News operates as a propaganda arm for the GOP, and also we've seen in other comments how there has also been reciprocal control exercised by Fox upon the GOP, upon Trump, and so there's the exertion of power by while they're not necessarily vertically integrated, as was the case with some other propaganda organs of 20th century fascist parties like the Nazi Party and the Italian Fascist Party. The This coordination is still there. There's an interaction, and if you look back in the history of the 20th century fascism, that or 20 that there were also other media organs that had a strong influence on the Nazi and also Italian fascist regimes uh, that were considered to be, for instance, Der Stürmer in Nazi Germany was not uh, um, a party organ of the Nazis, but it was still a newspaper favored by Adolf Hitler, and where he wrote some pieces, it was not under the direct control of the Nazi Party. But anyway, what I want to do is though step back and talk about why there is this particular media relationship between fascists and media, and also how this came to be. How did this develop over time? Um, and I am going to make a reference to one of the pieces I wrote about 10 years ago about the nature of the right wing, and I'm going to use it as a way to organize the many sort of chimerical or cloudy, slippery concepts that make up the descriptions of fascism one sees online. There are a number of them. Bryn Tannehill has made a summary of some of them. Umberto Eco, the literary theorist, also wrote about fascism, wrote a list of the characteristics of fascism. Bryn Tannehill's summary is a sort of a condensation of a number of different lists, and they're usually about 12 to 14. So it's not uh, to kind of grasp a unified heart of what fascism is hard from all these different uh, treatments. But I believe I have a way um, to describe fascism, describe neo-fascism too, and to link it to the media power and why media is so important, and a particular relationship to media is so important to the fascists, and how they are also so relatively good at using media, good in the sense of effective, or they are keyed in on media and the power of media, and they have um, preemptively used it against their sometimes clueless or innocent or defenseless or partly defenseless rivals for power, or opponents or anti-fascists of various kinds. So anyway, fascism is a right wing movement, and like right wing movements, and this is from my observation from 10 years ago, was that there is a willfulness associated with um, the right wing, the reactionaries, and that this willfulness is a outgrowth of a sense of entitlement to power. So um, the Nazis and the Italian fascists and other fascist movements were responses to various left wing movements inspired most often by Karl Marx's work, but or just they were labor movements that also had there were parties also associated that attempted to organize and make a political project out of the strikes or various other labor actions that were maybe ideologically not motivated ideologically, but just an expression of discontent by workers about their living conditions, their wages, their working conditions, so forth and so on, and the you can say the contradictions of capitalism. In other words, capitalism is hardest on the poorest and on workers, people who have to work for a living, and there are, however, groups of people who are not workers, who are on the edges of um, uh, the working class in different forms, who own some property, own either land or they own small businesses or so forth and so on. And they are not, big capitalists, so forth and so on, but they are have been overlooked often in the big political um, debates and the big theoretical debates, among other things. And also, Karl Marx, had, in my opinion, a faulty understanding of, or a politically and economically, let's say, either undeveloped or just wrongheaded. But I think it's a combination of undeveloped and wrongheaded idea about the ownership of various tools, including the ownership of small amounts of capital, large amounts of capital, and even though he had some theories that are very important that we need to listen to, we need to integrate it into our understanding of the world. But anyway, what happened was that there were these movements in the early 20th century that threatened both the control of the big capitalist and the ruling class of the nations of Europe, and also in the United States and other places. And there was ferment, and then there was a reaction to that ferment. There was a sense of that this was wrong, that it was dangerous, so forth and so on. And people who were conservative or reactionary by nature or fearful by nature uh, became organized and also had a sense of entitlement to have to be a better sort of person, and then they were to rule in some way or another, or at least if not to rule, to be uh, to be entirely in control of their environments. Okay, to have a sense of control, and so anyway, in this environment, then the appeal of fascism to both the big capitalists or the ruling class, and also the smaller business people and so forth and so on, who are much more numerous than the big capitalists, and who can actually form a movement of people who actually can become the shock troops or whatever it is, and can be recruited into a popular movement or a reactionary popular movement or whatever, or can become functionaries in a political party, so forth and so on. They can be organized in into this into political parties, and also another you know issue that in the 20th century that doesn't so much affect the 21st century re kindling of fascism, or the the strength of neo-fascism now, was the war, the First World War, which basically created the basis for both the formulation of the idea of fascism by Benito Mussolini, and also, or at least his successful for a time enactment of that, his creation of a fascist state. That war was a sign that, among other things, it was a clash of different nation states that were, some of which were more or less advantaged. And what happened was that the somewhat less advantaged ones, the sort of middle ones, again, this is a middle, they were not necessarily the poorest, but those who sort of had an entitlement to be considered leaders and rich and so forth and so on, and part of the heart of Western civilization, they felt cheated and by the outcome of World War I, and also they had ambitions related to what World War I was an expression of their ambitions to become more dominant, or imperialist powers themselves, empires like the French and English empires. So anyway, the fascism recruits people who have this sense of a desire for that their will be their volition, their will be realized without democracy. In other words, that democracy, and this is important thing, this is why in democracy your will has to become part of a process, the process of voting, or plebiscites of various kinds, or voting for representatives, voting for propositions on a ballot, so forth and so on. And if you win, your will gets realized. If you lose, your will is saved for, it may be defeated temporarily or may be defeated permanently. But anyway, you need to see your will, individual will, as part of a collective, that where in this collective, or in this plurality, or this composite of many people, you need to accept defeat, or be prepared to accept defeat, and work toward victory, maybe, but also acknowledge that you can be defeated. And so, and we see this again in the Trump big lie, that he can't imagine, or the myth of Trump is that he can't imagine that he can be defeated, and this is his base identifies with this this invincibility supposedly of the will of the leader, of the desire of the leader, and so and that is part of the so there's this mass identification with the leader, and that's why the leader is so important in the usually male leader is so important in fascism, and so but the will media. So getting to the subject of this video, media is a way that we can project our wills outward. If we are able to use media effectively, if we can gain access to media, if we can gain access to the microphone, to the access point of where more people are searching for information. In other words, the access points being the major media companies and their websites, or their airtime on cable, or their newspaper, their front page or their opinion page, so forth, so on. If we gain, we can put our voice onto those pages, or into that video, or into people's feeds if they're in a social media setting, so that we can, our words and our image and so forth and so on can be magnified, can be reproduced many times, and so our individual wills can be more effectively and more loudly and more powerfully broadcast, and therefore we can maybe in this case, get our will realized, or some of what we want realized, if we can talk about it, if we can agitate about it, so forth, so on media. And so the fascist solution, or the fascist approach, is to grasp onto this power that the media offers, the power of the mechanical reproduction of one's images, or the electronic reproduction of one's voice and one's images, so forth and so on, and get it into other people's minds, and then either make them either have a discussion. Their attitude is not so much of creating a discussion, but more they may feign having discussion. They may feign, but really what it is they want to continue to beat you down into submission with what they want, and if either that, or just drench you, brainwash you into believing what they believe, or connecting with you, yes, because you are predisposed to believe what they believe. And so in a way of finding that out is to project into the media outwards relentlessly and continuously, and with some cleverness, with some by hiring clever media operatives in some form or another, or filmmakers, or video makers, and producers, or of interactive shows, and so forth and so on. So anyway, the need then is, or the to especially important, or if you believe that your voice is going to be overwhelmed in a democratic, in other words, your ideas and what you want are really, you don't have a real plan, or you don't really want to realize and win a democratic debate, and or win an election, and then realize your plans via policy and so forth and so on, but you want to impose your will, and because it's basically what you want to do is quite unpopular, and it's about or it has a base, there's people who are passionate about it, but you want them to run roughshod over everyone else. In other words, those are the real people that you serve, and you are very, very, very involved with those people, and they are your team, and you don't care about the rest of the world. You don't care about the rest of the electorate. You are with your team, and we see this often in the way that the GOP and the far right, which is now synonymous with much of the GOP, continually burrows into that and tries to create this group of tens of millions of very, very fanatical people who are willing to throw away democracy, throw away, in the case of what Marjorie Taylor Greene just was talking about, a national divorce, throw away the actual United States of America, for their team, for their sense of their rightness, that they are entitled to exactly everything they want, and everything else can be shucked away, can be disposed of in some form or another. And so anyway, so the media allows you to do that. Now, I believe using media in a different way. I believe in having a dialogue, even though it's hard in this video, for instance, to create videos, and also to eventually I'd like to get more adept, and also have more time to create more complicated videos that involve interaction. But the YouTube format allows people to comment on it, so I invite comments on these videos, but also just to get these ideas out there. But anyway, the media allows people to magnify the media producers' voices in some form or another, or either by putting editing someone else's production, and being sort of standing back and being the director, the editor, so forth and so on, which is one very powerful way to get one's views magnified, because you can hide your voice by being the editor, the person who pairs, who creates the frame in which, so people's attention is locked on someone else and not on you. But you can have someone else be your, sock puppet is a little bit derogatory, and it's not necessarily always true in this case. But you can manage, you can create, you can get your message out through the frame, which is more powerful often than what's being said in the video. In other words, how you frame it, how you edit, how you make cuts, so forth and so on, what you put in it. So anyway, so basically, the media power of or the use of media by the right wing then is critical for their game. And also, what happens is that because they are still in a democracy, in other words, fascists come to power within democracies, within a multi-party system, and they if they become to power, they create essentially a one-party system. Even they may have various Potemkin parties or false parties that are simply there for show, but are really not, are just there as propaganda instruments to just rubber stamp what the main party, the leader, the dictator wants. But anyway, but in that context, the fascists need to create a false or a sense of a sphere or a bubble around themselves and around their mythology that they're creating often about the past, so forth and so on, or about the mythic past, and also the infallibility of the leader and the strength of the leader, and how the leader is entitled to rule. And one needs to create this bubble around them, so media can create a bubble around them and can protect them from this the reality of the world, what their faults and their mistakes and so forth and so on, and and this also is very tempting, or this for people who have felt like, so the base of the fascist movement are people who feel like they're threatened by changes in society, threatened by people quote unquote below them, or in the society who are going to take their place, or who are going to or rob them or something, or they just look different than them, and they think of them, they project all kinds of negative things about themselves, or just about in their fantasies about anybody who's quote unquote bad, and so they create a false sense of their own goodness and the badness of another group, and it's very comfortable to be living, or comfortable in a way to be living in this bubble that is co-created by this media apparatus that pumps out these bromides, or these comforting messages to this group that they are they are right, they are good, they're right, and also they're right to hate. And this is something that I'm going to do another video about. Not so much a media in this media series, that they are comforted that their hatred is entirely justified, that their sense of their negative emotions, that they are good despite being in conventional morality evil, or having evil thoughts, or having evil impulses, and that those evil impulses are basically inconsequential, that they're just they're offloaded onto either people below them, or the shadowy elites is another. So there's this is getting again a little bit ahead of myself or whatever, but fascism allows people to, there's a shadow elite that hides the real elite. The shadow elite is ideological, and in the media is created by this media, and most shockingly, or most clearly in the case of the Nazi Party, the Jews being this shadow elite that is betraying the German nation and so forth and so on, and it hides, that shadow elite hides the actual elite and their failures and so forth and so on. The ideological shadow elite, or the ideological and anyway, so the function of this propaganda media organization is to pump out the badness from or to disown the badness of people in the at the base of the fascist parties. So anyway, so media is very crucially important for this magnification of the power of minority parties that believe themselves to be majoritarian falsely, or to believe themselves to be of the real people, and so that they create this false sense of their size. Donald Trump was extremely sensitive about the size of his crowds, and this is very fascist in the sense that the size of the crowds are in a media presentation is all about creating the sense of the minority, the small group, appearing to be so massive and to be the real majority, even though they lose in a fair fight in a generally. And I'm not saying that the opponents to the current neo-fascism are not often incompetent and soft on fascism, and soft and unable to combat effectively the fascist threat in our current society, or the authority. If you if you want to call it be more general, the authoritarian slash fascist threat. So anyway, so this management of badness by casting it outward, casting it downward, and casting it upward at this shadow elite are all part of the fascist use of media. The media is instrumental in constantly providing this story, this narrative that can also be provided in in rallies and so forth and so on. So there's not the projection of an image and so forth and so on. There's more just amplification, using speakers and so forth and so on, and maybe video monitors in a big rally. So rallies are a way to, but media sort of quadruples the work of, or quintuples the work of every rally, so you can have more of your image projected outward if you have compliant media that sends out your image and your message and so forth and so on, either knowingly or unknowingly, and that can magnify your power, even though you represent a minority, or you represent even a small, or you represent really a small minority. If you look at the Marxist a view of fascism, and in a way, there's a lot of support for the way fascists are the kind of the crisis managers for capitalism, the brutal bad cops for capitalists when things go wrong for them, and they decide they can't deal with this democracy and this liberal values or liberal democracy so much anymore, that they want to dispense with it, or they just can't. It's too much to handle within the confines of what they want. And then we're talking about the ruling class, the people who are often get largely what they want, not always exactly. But so anyway, so I hope this is somewhat clear, or at least is a sketch, is sort of can start a process of thinking and responses that you might have to these ideas, and I'm trying to create a clearer picture of something that I think is poorly understood, but is also almost completely dominant in our politics, and creates a lot of confusion, I think, where I think that if we have a clearer understanding, we can then get to creating both a politics and then also public policy that's going to address the real concerns that that people have in our society. So anyway, please, if you enjoyed anything in this video, or if you find it stimulating and interesting, please like the video. Please share your thoughts and comments about these ideas or other ideas you have about the use of media in either previous in 20th century fascism or in 21st century fascism. And also, please subscribe to Politics 2100, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.